Good morning, everyone. Welcome to FORPROLI YouTube channel. My name is Suellen Thomaz. I am an English language professor at Federal University of Southern Bahia, UFSB, on campus Origins Courses in Porto Seguro, and general coordinator of the extension program Language Teachers Education, known in Portuguese as FORPROLI. I'd like to welcome you to the fourth meeting of the project. Let's talk about emotions, talk with experts, which is a joint action developed by the Applied Linguistic Research Group, the GPLA, Emotions in Language Teacher Education, at Federal University of Viçosa, led by Professor Ana Maria Barcelos, by the Outrange Program on Language Teacher Education, FORPROLI, at UFSB, and the Language Teaching and Work, LET, Research Group at State University of Rio de Janeiro, led by Professor Gisele da Silva Colombo. Greetings to the professors here, Ana Maria Barcelos, Gisele Colombo, Giovanni dos Santos, Professor Luis Herrera, our dear volunteers, Pamela, Felipe, as well as the participants who are here in the virtual room and on the YouTube with us, okay? Now, I invite you to the conversation titled Moving Emotions Forward, a conversation about emotions and the emotional literacy phase by Luis Javier Herrera. To introduce our speaker for this meeting and mediate the conversation, I invite Professor Ana Maria Barcelos, who is a professor at Federal University of Viçosa. Thank you, Ana. Your audio is muted.
Okay. Thank you, Suellen, for this. Bom dia a todos. Good morning, everyone. Thank you so much for being here in this meeting where we have our special guest today, Dr. Luis Javier Herrera, and he's an award-winning Spanish and English educator and a best-selling author. In 2024, he was selected as the 2024 TESOL Teacher of the Year, awarded by the TESOL International Association and National Geographic Learning. He's a professor of English at University of Economics and Human Sciences in Warsaw, Poland. He has won many awards, including the Association of Literacy Educators and Researchers 2018 Outstanding Dissertation of the Year. He's a Fulbright and English language specialist with the U.S. Department of State, and we are happy to announce that he's coming to Brazil in August and September this year. He has published widely, including several books with prestigious publishers such as University of Michigan Press, Routledge, Springer, Brill, TESOL Press, to cite just a few. Dr. Herrera's current teaching and research projects are situated at the intersection of identity, emotions, and well-being in language and literacy education, social-emotional learning, autoethnography and storytelling, refugee education, and language weaponization. Originally from La Habana, Cuba, Dr. Herrera enjoys creative writing, playing with his two doggies, Argo and Maui, and running in his free time. You can connect with him on his Instagram at Luis Javier Herrera. Welcome, Luis. Thank you so much for being here. We are very happy to have you here. Thank you.
Muito obrigado, Ana. Bom dia a todos. Thank you so much, everyone, for the invitation. I'm so excited to be here, and I'm looking forward to talking to all of us. I'm going to start sharing my screen, and for the presentation, I'm going to make it big. But I'm thinking that it might be better if I just keep it big instead of sharing like full screen, because then I don't want for any reasons for my screen to freeze or anything. So I think this should be fine. Let me know if you can see well, please. Thumbs up. Yes, I cannot. Yeah. Okay. Good. Excellent. So I hope this is okay. All right, everyone. So welcome again, and thank you so much for joining us. Today, I'm going to be talking about moving emotions forward, the temporal spectrum of emotion research in applied linguistics. As Ana mentioned, my name is Luis Javier Penton Herrera. My students tell me that I have a very long name. I just tell them choose one of the four, and that's fine with me. Whatever is fine with you will be fine with me. All right, so let's get started. Let's talk a little bit about emotions, and I'd like to start with stories and sharing a little bit about me. So, of course, I'm a doggy lover, animal lover, and I have two beautiful doggies, Maui on the left and Virgo on the right. Any chance I get to show them, I show them. So here they are. So I was born and raised in Cuba. I lived in Cuba for 17 years, and I moved to the US. My entire family were all refugees, and I lived in the US for a while, and I want to say 17 years on and off. But then I also moved to Japan because I was in the military. So I moved in Japan for 2 years. I was there. And then eventually I went back to the US and I moved to Poland, and I've been in Romania also for a period of time. And I'm currently joining you from Poland. But, my life has been always transitioning, on the move, living in different spaces. And that has definitely shaped who I am as a language learner and as a language teacher. And I feel that as a language teacher, it's very easy for us to forget that we learn a new language and all the emotional baggage that comes with it. So I always try to put myself in a situation where I'm pushing myself to feel or to remember how it feels to learn a new language, because my students are going through that process. I remember, and let me go back here. Here we go. So I show this picture to some of my students. They're like, what is that? Is that a machine? This is a computer. Depending on your age, you may not know what this is. For the audience, this is one of the very oldest computers that you'll probably see out there. But I remember when I arrived in the US, I was 17. I did not know a word of English. And I remember one day we were in the classroom, and I still remember the first day that I walked into a US school building. So in Cuba, especially where I was born and raised, schools were old houses that were turned into a school. So 1, 2 floors, maybe you had 100 students for the whole school. Very tiny, very, a room, like a house room would be a classroom. Everything was very intimate, very small scale, In the US, if you haven't been to the US, and you probably seen it in the buildings are very huge, and it's different culture, the language, of course, but also different practices in schools, because in Cuba, teachers move from classroom to classroom. In the US, students are supposed to go into the hallways and change classrooms. And so it was a very scary experience for me. But even the AC, I had never before going to the US felt the AC. So I remember, the first couple of months, just the AC itself, like smelling the AC, because it does have a smell. I don't feel it anymore, but every now and then I remember like me smelling or feeling the AC on my skin. All of these elements are emotions, and they definitely affected how I was interacting with my environment and language learning. It took me a long time to learn English because of all of these emotional disruptions or experiences that I had, depending on how you see it. But anyways, going back to the computer. So I remember one day I was in the classroom, and then the teacher says, library. And I don't know what she said because I didn't know English, but I did understand library. So I'm like, okay, so we're going to the library. I'm thinking, right? So we went to the library, and I guess we were supposed to do some research or something. Everybody arrived, and they were on the computer. And I remember I was just there sitting down in front of the computer, and I wanted to cry. I was 17. I wanted to cry, and I couldn't understand, like what I was feeling, but I was just there about to cry. And then thankfully this librarian stopped by. She spoke Spanish, and she's like, is everything okay? Do you need help? And I'm like, I don't know how to turn this on. And then I realized that was the first time in my life at 17 that I had seen a computer, and I didn't know how to turn it on or do anything with it. So, this adds an additional layer to when we're thinking about language learning, right? The external aspects of this space of language learning, but also different elements, technology, society, so I'm just giving you some synopsis here of emotions and education, so at this point you might be asking and wondering, Luis, why are you sharing these stories with us? And this is a very good question. I love stories, but also because I feel that emotions are ever present in our lives. I do not think, and this is from my perspective, of course, everything I'm going to share with you is from my own perspective. And that's the beauty of education and life, right? That we all bring our different perspectives into our conversation, and that's wonderful. So for me, everything that I see, especially in my research and in my practice, I see emotions always as part of it. I do not think that we can separate ourselves, the personal or the professional, from our emotions and our emotional experiences. I also think that emotions break or make our opportunities for growth and success. They really do. Emotions are neutral, and we're going to talk a little bit more about this later, but I see emotions as neutral, not good, not bad. What you do with it, how you channel that emotion. Okay, so this is information. How can I process this? What can I do taking this information? That would make or break your experiences and opportunities, I feel, right? Emotions are data. I see them as data, as information for continuous lifelong learning. Going back to this idea, I don't see emotions are good, as bad, as positive, as negative. They're just data. They're information. When you're feeling something, it means that your body is reacting to their surrounding. And as a person, then it's I feel that each of us were kind of scientists in our own way, right? Individual scientists, like for our own emotions. Like, okay, so I'm feeling this. Start analyzing, why am I feeling this? How can I channel this in a positive way, et cetera, et cetera. I'm going to talk more about this later on, but just to kind of give you a quick introduction of emotions for me. I came across, as I was preparing this presentation, I came across this particular in social media. I want to say it's Instagram. I'm not very techie, but I'm learning. My students told me that Facebook is for old people, so I'm getting techie with Instagram now. But I think it's Instagram. But I came across this and I thought it was fantastic, so I included it here. It says, "Teacher truth, every seed holds a story." And that very much goes with the message in the previous slide. We cannot separate. We cannot ask students or ourselves to leave our emotions and our experiences behind. They come with us. They come with us into the classroom. And if you cannot see very well here, for example, the seats, right? Each of the seats representing a student comes with their own baggage experiences. LGBTQ and rejected by family. Parents are in jail. Lives with grandparents. Undiagnosed ADHD. Works to help support family. Mom is an alcoholic. Has undocumented family, etc., etc., etc. Emotions are everywhere in our language classrooms. And I'm saying this from my perspective as a Spanish and English teacher. I teach English and Spanish here at the university now. And I did in the US K through 12 for many, many years, Spanish, English teacher. And emotions are always there, especially middle school, 6th, 7th, 8th grade. I always say I survived 1 year at middle school. My hat's off to middle school teachers. But, emotions are always present. We cannot separate it. Also, teachers, the way that we react to our students' emotions surface in the classroom, that's also, our own responsibility as well. So at this point, I have a question for you here. I also came across, as I was preparing this presentation, and this is a fantastic book. I recommend it if you have the chance to read it. I came across this quote and I thought about this presentation, so I added it here. Today's neuroscientists are breaking new ground and helping us understand why emotion is an important learning variable, and how the affective side of learning is the critical interplay between how we feel, act, and think. Feel, act, think. Very important. Mind and emotions are not separate. Emotions, thinking, and learning are all linked. What we feel is what's real, even if only to us and no one else. Emotions organize and create our reality. So I would love to hear from you, and just maybe like a thought, yes, no, or anything else that you would like to share. Do you agree? Do you disagree with this quote? And maybe we can have a few seconds just to see what we get from the audience. And as we wait, I think we need to do a disclaimer. The book author is not paying me to promote the book, but I think it's a good book. And if we don't
If
have any
you
comments,
want, we can continue, and when we have some comments, we can collect them and pass them to you, okay?
fantastic, fantastic. If we don't have any comments at this point, that's perfectly
Not
fine.
yet.
This reminds me, I like stories, so I go on tangents, but I come back, don't worry. But I was talking to my colleagues and about silence one day, silence in the language classroom. And then I was teaching this class that semester. It was about speaking. It was an English class. And then I came into the classroom and I'm like, everyone, I was talking to some of your, instructors about silence in the classroom. What do we think about silence in speaking? And then my students looked at me like, what is he talking about? This is a speaking class. Why are we talking about silence? And then we just started talking about silence and how we react to it. And, so as teachers, it's a different topic for a different conversation, but how do we react to silence? Do we see silence as something negative, positive? So yeah, think about that. Sometimes we ask questions and we don't have a response. As language teachers, do we see that as a failure? Do we see that as an opportunity? Do we just say, okay, maybe you don't have anything right now, think about it, I'll come back to it. Some students need more time, right? So just a footnote there for our presentation. All right, so let's get started with our conversation today. Yes, that was just an introduction. Now our conversation is going to start now, okay? So I'm dividing our conversation into 3 parts: emotions or emotions. Part 2, I'm going to kind of give you a historical overview about emotions in applied linguistics. And then part 3, Colin, I see there is something new for me to learn. Oh, good. Wonderful. Colin, thank you for joining us. Thank you. And then part 3 towards an emotional literacy phase. Okay, so I'm dividing our conversation into these 3 parts. I do have to say that the conversation comes from this edited volume that I had the wonderful opportunity to work with Bezat and Mohammed, and the 3 of us co-edited this book. So a lot of the presentation comes from the editorial chapter 1, and chapter 2, which I co-wrote with my wonderful friend and colleague, Anna Becker, okay? So I'll walk you through the process, and I'll let you know this is chapter 1, chapter 2, but the first part is from chapter 1. So let's get started with some definitions. I think this is important so we don't mix them or misinterpret the definitions wording as I go through it, okay? Emotional literacy. So what I mean by emotional literacy is the ability to understand, and you can take a screenshot, a picture here if it helps you, the ability to understand our own emotions, the capacity to listen and empathize with others and their emotions, and the ability to express emotions in a constructive way. And I've been thinking a lot about this. When we process emotions, I think there are 3 ways on how we process emotions. It happens to our students as well. And this is very important for us to understand how literate we are when it comes to emotions. When we're processing emotions, do we express them in a destructive way, meaning we don't know how to use strategies to shape that emotion into something positive? So the reaction will be expressing them in a destructive way, in a constructive way, which is more, in my perspective, and from my experience with constructive approaches to emotion regulation. Usually, if you are using that emotional data, usually you become creative. So even emotions that you do not desire at that point, or emotions that might be confusing to you, if you're able to use strategies, if you're emotionally literate, you're able to use strategies to use them in a constructive, creative way. So destructive, constructive, creative, or simply shocked, like you freeze, right? So which of the 3? Think about those, right? Emotional intelligence, different, very different from emotional literacy, okay? It's our capacity to know and manage our emotions, motivate ourselves, and recognize others' emotions and handle relationships. And last but not least, emotional agility. And this comes from a book. I think I left it in the living room. But it's, I forgot, message me later and I'll send you the name of the book. It's a really, really good book. It talks about emotional agility. But it's the ability to approach our life experiences, again, emotions as data, in a mindful, values-driven, and productive way. So be agile with your emotions, right? So I give you kind of a very short and sweet emotional literacy about knowing and expressing feelings. Intelligence is how we use those feelings to make decisions and get along with others. and emotional agility is acknowledging your emotions and taking actions that align with your values. All right. These three, we're not born with it. Okay. Maybe some people are born, like with everything, some people are tend to be more, they lean more towards like numbers than letters and this and that. But we all have the capacity to develop emotional literacy, emotional intelligence, and emotional agility. It's like everything in life. Right now I'm a runner. I like to run. Right? But I haven't run a marathon in a long, long time. I'm also getting much older. I'm not going to run a marathon without practicing. It's not going to happen, So I have to go through the whole process and practicing. And it's the same with emotional agility, intelligence, and literacy. Okay. So, all right, let's start with part one. Emotions or emotions. And this is another thing that I saw online. It is important to acknowledge and celebrate our feelings. So let's acknowledge and celebrate being stressed. Okay. Being stressed is not bad, by the way. It could be also something that you can use for your benefit. All right. So emotions. I'm gonna jump in. I have a lot of information in the slides because I like to give a lot of information, but I usually just go through one or two bullet points and then take screenshots as I go through it in the conversation, or I can share the PDF with you later, no problem. But this is a lot of information for you to process and think about. All right, so emotions, I really like these two quotes. Emotions are as ancient and complex as our own history. That is, emotions are part of the biocultural story of being human. This idea of we cannot separate the human emotions from humans, right? If you separate emotions from humans, then what do you have? Probably not a human anymore, right? So AI, technology, not emotions, right? So humans, we are connected to emotions, and emotions are connected to us. The emotions have served, and you can go deeper into this, more of a biological, genetic aspect of emotion, which is thanks to emotions that we have survived as a species, right? Emotions can be described as not only private reactions to external events, but also as discursive processes that are socially constructed, that is influenced by regulations, norms, habits, and conventions. And I like Benish's quote here, because this particular quote, I do see emotions in different conversation, but I do think of everything as a social and emotional, I approach everything from a social and emotional perspective, right? Emotions, you cannot separate it from the social aspect. And that's what Benesh is saying. The social and emotional are always connected. Emotions happen in social environments, and the social aspect of humanity creates and interacts with emotions constantly. You cannot separate both. Okay? Again, from my perspective. If you have not seen this book, please check it out. They're not paying me for it again, but Mark Brackett, Emotion, Permissions to Feel. It's a really good book. I think I had this book here. I probably left it also. I have books here and all over the place, so I don't know where I leave them sometimes. But Emotions, Mark Brackett. Check it out. Permission to Feel. Great book. And he talks about the different emotions and the way that he categorizes the emotions. You can see them here. High energy, if you can see here on the right-hand side. So high energy, low energy, high pleasantness, and low pleasantness. Okay, so how pleasant emotions are, how much energy they give you. So if they're high pleasantness emotions and high energy, that's usually, especially for children, they cannot control themselves, right? When something is joyful or optimistic or excited, and then I'm thinking of like when I was teaching kindergarten first graders, they couldn't contain themselves, like, and they're jumping around, and I'm like, okay, let's try to, let's pack that energy and throw it into the sun. You have to come up with cute things when you're teaching kindergarten first graders. But anyways, so think about emotions and again, as we're talking more about emotions as data, how do we approach emotions? Now, emotions are different from feelings as well. Emotions, usually you don't have time to process them. They're immediate. They happen automatically. They're part of our body, of our DNA, our genetic. It's physiological, okay? It's a response. Think of fear when you see a snake. By the way, snakes are not always bad, okay? Be respectful, but they're not always bad. So if you see a snake, some of you, might be scared of snakes. So you get fearful, right? Or surprised at something, right? So those are immediate, automatic reactions. Those are emotions, right? So they're triggered by stimuli, but you don't process. It's just you react, right? Feelings, however, those are more conscious, right? And they do tend to happen after you start processing or analyzing or reflecting on those experiences, right? So worry, bitterness, things like that, those are feelings, right? So just something for you to keep in mind. I'm not going to go too deep into the conversation because it can be a whole presentation about those two. Now, let's talk about research on emotions and where we are right now, right? So for language teaching and learning, we do know that emotions, I always think that, and this is something, think of motivation, for example, being one of the most empowering aspects and critical aspects of language teaching and learning, right? Motivation for students, for learners. But we do know that emotions are among the most empowering and motivating factors affecting teaching, learning, and professional development. Emotions, I do think, will break or make your experiences. I said that earlier, okay? So it's there. Also, emotions are, as we said earlier with Benesh, they're affected by our ecological and contextual factors, right? Society, social aspects of emotions, your experiences. And emotions are also part of it's part of who we are as teachers as well, right? Our lives, our identities are continuously shaped by our emotions and what we do with our emotions, because this is something I'll talk more about it in part 2, but in our conversations in language education, we tend to approach emotions as something that happens and we are affected by it and that's it. But emotions, we're not affected by it. We can take charge of it and we can learn from it. Again, emotions can be used as sources of data where we can improve our lives because of it, okay? Emotions are fantastic. That's why I researched them. I love them. The majority of scholarly works have focused on the reciprocal effects of language teachers and students' emotions, identity, well-being, and agency. These 4 elements are usually interconnected somehow. Identity is huge in research right now. Emotions, we're getting better. Well-being, surfacing. There is also become agency is also very big, but well-being is growing. Emotions often, again, being portrayed, it's being portrayed as a consequential entity, right? So it's a consequence of. However, fewer publications have been interested in how emotions can be operationalized into procedural tools for personal and professional development for teachers and students alike. Luis, what is this? Okay, what I'm trying to say here is that in research, I'm a practitioner, I'm a language teacher. I don't consider myself a researcher. I'm a language teacher who does research different. I do not see myself as a researcher. I see myself, my identity, first and foremost, I'm a language teacher. I teach languages. I teach English and Spanish, right? And I do research to improve my practice and to be better for my students. But I do see in research, I'm interested as a practitioner, I'm interested in how to use the data. We do know that there is this huge research gap between theory and practice in our field, in education, but in our field, language education. And, as a practitioner, I'm always thinking about, okay, so how can I use this information in my classroom? So that's what I'm interested in, especially this bottom part here. When I say that, fewer publications have been interested in how emotions can be operationalized into procedural tools. So I feel that we haven't had a lot of conversations in the field about how research about emotions can give us actual practical tools on how to use that, how to make that research practical for language teachers, right? And that's where I'm hoping to go into in my research. But that's how this book that I shared with you earlier started. Let me go back here very quickly to show you. So this book, right? So this is how it started. So Bezat, Mohammed, and I got together and we were talking about this and, the fact that we're language teachers and we're like, research on emotions is fantastic. It's very theoretical, very beautiful, but how can we use that as sources of data to learn from it in our practice, right? And then we came up with this idea of emotion, which means that, and this is from chapter 1, by the way, this means that our life experiences, that's the E, generate emotional responses that provide data for us to analyze, reflect upon, and make choices that contribute to our growth. This is emotional intelligence, right? So how can we use our emotions, our experience in life, to analyze it, reflect upon it, and make choices that would be helpful for us as language teachers, but also then we are in the responsibility of teaching those skills to our students. So we see emotions in this book, we see emotions, emotion, not as occurrences that we suffer, but as actions, judgments, choices, responsibilities, and data. And I say it again, data, information that we can use to improve our personal and professional lives. And please take this as language education, but as your life as well. All right. This is, and this for some people that might be a little bit of an issue or a different perspective, but we do not see emotions as positive or negative. We see them as data, as information, neutral, right? Because well, I'm getting ahead of myself, but I'll go over why we don't see it as positive or negative, okay, in part 3. But now I'm going to go into part 2, historical overview of emotions in applied linguistics. And I was so happy to co-write this chapter. It's chapter 2 of the book with my wonderful friend and colleague, Anna Becker. And she's fantastic. Check out her work. And she's not paying me for it, okay? But yeah, check it out. She's fantastic. And we wrote about emotions in the making, right? So we were thinking about kind of like a literature review, background information about emotions in applied linguistics, language education for the edited volume. And that is this chapter here, chapter 2. So we conceptualized, or we divided the line of research that we saw, that we were able to find in the literature review about emotions in language education, into 3 phases. We call it 3 phases, 3 separate, eras, if you will, right? And we named it emotions as disturbances phase, emotions as something to lower phase, and emotions as a binary phase. Okay, we called it this, but this is again from our own research when we were working on it. Now, the biggest takeaway that I want to share with you about disturbances, emotions as disturbances phase, and we actually found one. We say 1930s. I would think the oldest, if I remember correctly, because I'm terrible with numbers, and but I think it was 1937 was the oldest article that we found. And it only mentioned emotions, I think 2-3 times, but it talked about how emotions are too difficult, too complex to analyze. And that's why, they did not go deeper into that topic. But in this era phase, they talked about emotions. Emotions will be portrayed as disturbances, problems, obstacles. So there is a lot of kind of a pessimistic views on emotions during this time, right? But that also tells you a lot about how emotions were seen during this period of time. We could talk about it like from different perspectives, why they see emotions as problematic. I mean, from a feminist perspective, you can think of like, for example, emotions always have been considered feminine, which is also problematic for many people, right? And then perhaps emotions are too complex to analyze from a psychological perspective. They still didn't have the right tools or information or data to see emotions or to analyze emotions. I mean, we're in 2025 and we're still talking about emotions, so emotions is not something that you can put in a box, right? We have journals, academic journals devoted to emotions, which means that it's something that is never going to be fully understood. We're continuously looking at it from different perspectives, right? So it's something complex. Emotions are complex. You cannot put emotions into one box ever. So we did write here, Anna Becker and I, the prevailing view, the 3rd bullet point, the prevailing view during this period seemed to suggest that a lack of emotions was conducive to effective language learning, reinforcing the notion that emotions were primarily negative, they called it, and thus obstacles to be managed or overcome for educational success. So the idea, and you see it again and again in the publications, is that, if students are feeling emotions, especially I talked about anxiety, and they were usually bad. Like we have to try to delete those emotions or take emotions out of the process, right? So that was the idea. I don't know how you delete emotions, but that was the conversation there. Again, this early view sees emotions as something disruptive, as something negative. They talked about it. Also too complex. Oh, here it is, Patterson. Too complex for systematic study. This is the oldest that we found, the oldest article, if I remember correctly, in the 1930s. It's in the Modern Language Journal, I believe. And now, 1930s to 60, that's what we started, learning about and identifying. But then in later 60s, 70s, then we started seeing some developments happen, which is going from this idea of disturbances or seeing emotions as disruptive to actually realizing that emotions are ever present in language learning, but it's something that we have to lower. So not take out emotions out of the equation, or like, oh no, if emotions are existing, it's not going to happen. It's bad for learning, so we have to take emotions out. No. Emotions are present. We just have to lower it. And I think the best representation that we have during this time of lowering emotions is Krashen. And I think many of us are perhaps familiar with the affective filter hypothesis. And if you're not familiar, here it is. The affective filter hypothesis, Krashen proposed that it's a mental block that prevents acquireders, language learners, from fully utilizing the comprehensible input they receive, the information they receive for language acquisition. In other words, when your affective filter goes up, which means you're worried, anxious, your brain cannot process information. But then when you lower emotions, right, then language acquisition, learning becomes easier, right? This is very interesting for me because we hear again and again in language teacher preparation programs, oh yes, lower the affective filter. Okay, fantastic. How do you do that? We don't go into it, into that conversation in language teacher preparation programs. Rarely, we just say, well, we have to make students feel better. We have to make students feel safe. Okay, how, right? So this is why I'm so interested in social emotional learning. We're going to talk about that in part 3, but just giving you a synopsis glimpse here of what's happening later, but kind of like a trailer, right, for a movie. But yes, definitely when we think about the affective filter and lowering emotions, or emotions as something to lower, I always think about Krashen, right? Also, during this period of time, 60s to 90s, scholars began to argue both that affective emotions and cognitive brain engagement were essential for deep processing and therefore language acquisition. I think from just personal, perspectives and experiences, we can definitely agree with this second bullet point, right? Yes, you can memorize things, but to a certain extent, right? So if you connect your emotions to your learning experiences, think about motivation. Without motivation, we don't have learning. As a language teacher, I love teaching A1, or in the US, they used to call it newcomers level. And some of my colleagues, not teachers, they tell me, Luis, do you like teaching newcomers or A1 or basic level because it's easier? And I'm like, no, that's actually the hardest one. It's like, what do you mean? And I'm like, yes, because as language teachers, we know that will break or make our learners' experiences. Most learners give up language learning in the first class. Why? Because they do not get motivated, because they do not feel interested, because then what some people would categorize as negative emotions, which I would categorize as emotions that they do not know how to handle, they do not know how to overcome the experiences that they're feeling, the unwanted or undesired experiences that they're feeling. It could be frustration, it could be lack of motivation, it could be boredom, right? They don't know how to overcome that. Or the teachers, we have the responsibility to create an environment where students do not face those experiences, right? Or if they do, they know how to mitigate them, right, to their benefit. So think about that if you're teaching A1 or newcomers. I'm not trying to give you negative, undesired emotions here as language teachers, but think about it, right? So this is something to keep in mind. Affect and cognitive aspects of learning, they always go together, okay? for deep processing to really happen. Also, during this time, and I'm hoping I'm not speaking too fast or going too fast through the information, but if you feel that I am, please write in YouTube or in the chat, and then the team here will let me know. Okay, I do see thumbs up, so thank you. So some of the most common emotions during this time were, and of course, because as researchers we tend to focus on like the most chaotic aspects, because that's research. Like we see chaos and we're like, oh, research, we're excited about it. So of course we're focusing more on emotions associated with what prevents or impedes language acquisition, right? Anxiety. I mean, we have so much anxiety research, right? Frustration, demotivation. Also, it's about, at the end of the day, during this time, a lot of the research was looking at how can we look at negative, these emotions are negative or negative emotions, and how can we lower that, right? So students learn emotions. And they agreed, scholars agreed that by decreasing negative emotions experienced by learners, that means like making them less anxious, frustrated, etc. This automatically would make them better language learners, or this will increase their language learning experiences, right? So I'm not going to go too deep into all of this because I have a lot more to cover, but check out the rest of the bullet points, okay? And then we go into the last phase, we call it, which is from the 1990s to the present, 2025. And of course, this we're building on the work of giants, of course. We have here McIntyre, Mercer, McIntyre et al. With Tommy Gregerson. Wonderful, check it out. Then we started expanding a little bit more about, on the perspective of emotions and language learning, and emotions is something to lower into the social aspect, the social relationships of language learning when it comes to social and emotional, not social emotional learning, but the social and emotional aspects of language learning and teaching, right? So then we started to focus a little bit more on, for example, emotional intelligence. We see a little bit of, it hasn't really taken hold a lot. We hear every now and then, but we have seen some publications on emotional intelligence, but not a lot of conversations. But we started to see this conversation about, or surfacing of, emotional intelligence and how it could play a pivotal role in language acquisition. Also this idea of, and this is where the binary is positive, negative, we were focusing a lot on the negative emotions before, 1970s to 90s, or 60s to 90, but then 90s to present, we're going more into negative and positive, and how can we capitalize on the positive emotions, right? So that's what we're seeing presently. I do see in research, Anna and I, we found that student emotions, especially in the first two phases, were of primary concern. And there's a lot of research out there, especially for the first two phases, on student emotions. But language teacher emotions, they were not paid as much attention before. Now they are, especially with language teacher identity work, for example. And I'm not saying that identity is the same as emotions. I'm saying that some of the topics I mentioned earlier, identity, agency, well-being, they every now and then they touch on emotions, right? But yeah, so there is now more work on language teacher emotions, before not so much. And I'm going to go into the positive and negative later, but there's still many areas that remain under research. We found some examples. Researcher emotion. Yes, we have student emotion, teacher emotion. What about researcher emotion? What about language teacher educator emotions, right? What about doctoral students? So I've been working with a lot of doctoral students. I'm not working with a lot of master level students here in Poland, and bachelors too, but maybe also bachelor students, bachelor, master, doctoral students emotions. But I thought about doctoral students emotions because, if you have a doctoral degree, that's a journey. I like to say it's not true, but I like to say that I lost my hair during my doctoral dissertation phase. It's a lie. I was already bald, but it's really a process. So doctoral students emotions, think about that, right? So there is a lot of research that we can still go over when it comes to emotions, right? So think about it. If you're thinking about, research connected to emotions, going to different directions that we haven't explored, because yes, some areas become saturated, like student emotions, and we can still learn much more, but students emotions, language teacher emotions, but there's so many more areas that remain under-researched. Part 3, and I hope my doggy's not too loud. One of my 2 doggies woke up. They're 14, but every now and then they would wake up, play around, and then fall asleep again. All right, towards an emotional literacy phase. And this is also from chapter 2 with Anna Berker and I. So we talked about the emotional aspect, right? So we conceptualized these 3 phases. But of course, Anna and I were practitioners, so we're like, okay, Anna, so what can we do about this? You know, we're saying that there is this research gap, and we're practitioners, so we have to make it practical, right? And that's what we kind of, this is our call at the end of chapter 2, which is the emotional literacy phase. So we propose, Anna and I, that the field embraces emotions as a natural, ever-present, and long-lasting critical element in our lives as daily users of language. Daily users of language. Language learners, language teachers, language users. We use language in the classroom and beyond, okay? We're using language right now. And by the way, language, this is a different conversation, but language is more than words, okay? So everything is language, body language, nonverbal communication. So language in general, right? Language are connected to emotions. Emotions are connected to language. Now, we advocate for situating emotions as the meta center or center in applied linguistics and sister fields, okay? So we see emotions, and I know this is, everyone has a different perspective. We see emotions as the center of everything that happens in the language learning and applied linguistics and language education as the center of everything connected to language use, language teaching, language learning. And we propose that the field of language education, applied linguistics, sister fields, take into consideration the criticality of emotional literacy in language teaching, learning, and research. And this is something that we end with in that chapter. That means, and I'm going to go back very quickly here to language literacy to help us remember. So the older I get, and you know, every year that passes by, I'm a language teacher, but I also think about, okay, so what am I teaching languages for, right? And it's a little bit philosophical, but maybe it comes with age. As I'm getting older, I'm thinking, can I teach language in such a way that is going to help my students be successful and create a better world? And if we can use language to create conflict, we can definitely use language to make peace or resolve or avoid conflict as much as possible. So again, the emotional literacy phase, knowing and expressing feelings, right? Can we teach students about the power of language, not just about learning language, but the responsibility that comes with learning that language and how we use that language, right? And how can we express language in such a way that is going to make their community better, their world a better place? Yes, it's philosophical for some people, but again, it comes with age. As I'm getting older, I'm getting more philosophical and more emotional, and I keep looking at more research. But you know, I also think, and this also comes from my conversation with Anna in chapter 2. We talk about no, actually, this is in chapter 1 with Mohammed and Bezat. Sorry, I'm mixing all the chapters. And you know, and Giselle brought this up. Thank you, Giselle, for this communication that we had. But you know, in chapter 1, I don't think we articulated it well enough. So I'm going to share it with you here. But we're saying that the binary, positive, negative, we do not agree with it. And I mentioned that earlier because we feel that it restricts our vocabulary. And then we're imposing in research, language teacher education or language education or applied linguistics, you know, in the sister fields. When we say positive, negative emotions, we're putting emotions into boxes. Happiness, positive. Frustration or anxiety, negative. Who is building those boxes? And why are we separating emotions into positive, negative, putting them into boxes where emotions cannot be boxed? They're individual experiences, human experiences, individual to all of us, right? So this is problematic for 2 reasons. First, it restricts our vocabulary Because really, when we think about positive or negative emotions, how many do we see in the literature? We see them again and again and again, and that's why I showed you this earlier. How much research have you seen about peeved? Being peeved in the language classroom? We don't have that, right? Maybe we have frustration, maybe we have bored. I haven't seen a lot of research about morose in the classroom, for example, right? So we need to think about our vocabulary also in language teacher education, or in language education in general, applied linguistics. We should expand a little bit beyond what we currently have, right? Also, going back to this idea of judgments and positive and negative, what is positive for me doesn't have to be positive for somebody else. When I'm a runner, I mentioned earlier, being stressed is actually not bad for me. Positive, negative, this idea. No, if I have a run coming up, or if I have a very stressful day, I know what works for me, and I know how to manage that in a productive way. How? I'm going to the gym, or I run here in the forest. I live next to a forest, and I just run a lot, and that really helps me. It's good for my body, good for my mind. And then I write, because when I run a lot, then I write. I get more inspired, right? So, it is data. Going back to this idea of emotions as data. Emotions are not good. Emotions are not bad. They're just there. They're data. And then what we do with it, and if I know something, and this is, I talk to my students about this all the time. If you know something gives you an emotion that you do not enjoy, can you do something different? Or if you have to do that, whatever it is that you're doing, and then you get that emotion, can you manage that emotion through different strategies? Can you change the way that you feel and put it into something more productive? So think about this emotional intelligence. So we talk a lot about this, but also Anna and I, we talked about perhaps Bezat, Mohammed and I in chapter 1, we give different vocabulary words that perhaps we can use instead of, oh, this is a negative emotion, or this is a positive emotion. Desired, helpful, ambivalent, pleasant, undesired, unexpected, unhelpful, unpleasant. Let's expand beyond positive, negative. The idea is not to have this binary, but to have vocabulary that each of us want to use to represent, emotions from our own perspective. I don't see frustration as bad. It's not a negative emotion, or anxiety as bad, or negative emotion as we see it in the literature, right? So that's the idea. I know this is new and problematic, perhaps for many people. It's a new way of thinking. So let's think about it more. Let's talk about it more. But we consider it harmful. We do feel that it's harmful for the field to strictly label emotions as positive or negative, because we do think that emotions have a purpose, all emotions. And because here's the problem. And this is positive psychology, by the way, there is this thing about toxic positivity. If you label and put all the negative emotions into that box and you try to avoid them, and you're only focusing on the positive one, first, you're not growing as a person. You're not emotionally growing as a person. And number two, it becomes toxic positivity, with everything is good and wonderful. No, life is up and down, right? It's a roller coaster. So you have to know how to deal and manage emotions. Same, in the language classroom, right? So emotions are there to guide us, teach us, and inform us. Okay. We feel that, again, this idea of positive, binary, positive, negative, perpetuates a mindset where certain feelings are deemed unacceptable or problematic and should therefore be censored. And, we're seeing a lot of research in the field that goes into, if you go into like negative emotions in the field, a lot of those emotions now going back to the first phase of being problematic, or not acceptable, or not helpful, or not. So we want to avoid that, right? And then the practice of stigmatizing or even censoring certain emotions can lead to internalized shame, repression, or denial of those feelings, rather than a healthy acknowledgement and processing of them, especially for language teachers. Let me tell you, I remember the first year I was teaching elementary school. And, as a novice teacher, sometimes you did your best, but it was not a good class. I did my best, and I felt so much shame. And I'm like, my students are not learning. Sometimes I would arrive back home, when I used to go back home after a long day of teaching, and I would just drop my bags on the door and just go and like just cry my heart out on the sofa. I was like, I cannot do this anymore. And there was so much shame attached to it, right? But if we think of shame as negative, then we don't want to talk about it, right? It seems as something that we want to repress or deny or make invisible. We don't want that, because in the field, first, we're educators, we want to learn, but also we want to make sure that we're talking about every single emotion possible and how can we deal with it and how can we learn from it, right? So this is, again, from our perspective. And last points here. Such labeling also oversimplifies the complex nature of human emotions. It can deter natural emotional responses, making individuals less likely to openly discuss or address them, like I was telling you with the story, thus potentially hindering personal growth and emotional resilience. Okay. And then the last point here, going beyond lowering negative emotions or increasing positive emotions, we feel that we should go deeper into the what, why, and how of emotions in language education and in applied linguistics. And we make a case that if we go into the how, what, and why of emotions, that would help us breach a little bit the gap between research and practice. Now, a little bit philosophical here towards the end, but do we look at the winter and say, this is bad weather, and do our best to ignore it? Or do we learn to appreciate its beauty, enjoy its nature, and smile while the cold breeze caresses our skin? This is in Poland, by the way, in the winter. When I was preparing the presentation, I usually talk to my friends, especially my Polish friends. They don't like the winter, and I love it. And it's this idea of sometimes some of my friends, Polish friends, because they were born and raised here in Poland, and the winter for them is like, they don't want to deal with it. And I'm like, no, we have to appreciate the beauty of everything, right? It's the same with emotions, I feel, especially in language teaching, language learning, language usage, using language as well, because shame, confusion, frustration, that happens when we're using languages as well, right? So language learners, when you use language users, when we use language outside, like I'm learning Polish, it seems like forever I'm learning Polish, but when I use language, the Polish sometimes outside, sometimes it's fantastic and I feel like I'm on top of the world and I feel pride in this and that. But then also sometimes I get confused, or I get my stuttering, because I stutter, especially if I'm tired. So, my stuttering comes out and it's like, oh, this is going to be a very confusing interaction, right? So how do you deal with that? So I'm trying to say here, we have to be more open to really analyzing and talking about every single emotion, not as positive, not as negative, but as part of life, right? Now, looking ahead, and I'm going to stop with a couple more slides after this, but these are conversations that we can have later on, a separate conversation. Social emotional learning, everything I see in life is through a social and emotional lens. Everything connected to life, I see it through a social and emotional perspective. And I do think that we need to talk more about social emotional learning in language education. Going back to this idea of lowering the affective filter. Yes, fantastic. How? Through social emotional learning. How do we improve students' emotional literacy, emotional intelligence, emotional agility in language education? Through social emotional learning. How can we improve well-being and give students strategies to manage, to mitigate undesired emotional experiences, things like that? Social emotional learning. So I feel that everything, civic education, social emotional learning, mindfulness is social emotional learning. So I feel that really the field should gravitate more towards social emotional learning. One of the challenges that I'm seeing as a practitioner with social emotional learning is that social emotional learning is a practitioner. It's a practice. It's an approach. It's a teaching practice. It's not a theory. And because it cannot be theorized, because it's a practice, it's a teaching approach, is how we teach, is our pedagogy, or andragogy if you're in adult education. It cannot be theorized, then I find, and this is my experience with research in top tier journals, that they're not interested in it because it's not a theory, it's a practice, right? It's teacher research. Same with action research. There's a stigma around action research, and I'm seeing that there is a big stigma with social emotional learning. I've been very, very grateful that I've been able to publish some of my articles and some of my books, but I've had really like some journals, like within hours, they're rejected, and they're like, no, this is not a good fit because it's too practical. And that was one of the comments that I got. This is teacher research. Like, teacher research is bad, you know. We're teachers, we're the infantry of education. I was in the military, so I think of, you know, infantry. But anyways, that's a different conversation. But you know, extending emotional concerns and considerations to non-human beings. I've been thinking more about this, but this is also a different conversation. You know, when we use languages, right? Like language, this is more for applied linguistics. How do we use language with non-human beings? I'm an animal lover. I love my doggies. I talk to them in Polish, so they're Polish speakers. They're from the US, but they're Polish speakers. Unless they do something bad, and then I speak to them in Spanish, and probably they don't understand. They ignore me in 3 languages, so, you know. But anyway, so when I think of like speaking in Polish and practicing in Polish with them, I realize that I don't have that affective filter goes really down, because I know they're not judging me, right? It's like with humans, it's different. But I'm very, my friend the other day, he was listening to me speaking to my dogs, like, Luis. And I was like, oops, you know, like I realized that he was there. And then my Polish, I started stuttering a little bit because my emotions came up, right? Like the affective filter went up. But then when I'm only with them, I don't have any affective filter. So it would be interesting from an applied linguistics, language education perspective, you know, the impact of animals perhaps on language learning, language use, something to think about. And then AI, of course. You know, how do we use language to communicate with AI? You know that there is an AI dating app? So, you know, using language for dating app with AI, you're dating an AI entity. You know, this is like maybe 22nd century research, but, you know, we maybe something to keep in mind looking ahead. I don't know, you know, so we talked about that in chapter 1. In chapter 2 also with Anna Becker. And something that I found that I want to share with you, this is a report by McGraw-Hill. And when we talk about social and emotional aspects of education, emotions always being present, the barriers educators feel are holding students back from succeeding are connected to issues embedded in society, social aspects, and incredibly difficult for educators to overcome alone. If it's social, it's always emotional, right? Social, emotional, always connected. 57% of educators said that the challenges that students face are outside of school. 45% said that is struggling with behavioral and mental health issues. Mental health is different, but behavioral issues are usually connected to emotional intelligence, emotional literacy, ability to manage our emotions and deal with it. And then 36%, this is more literacy aspects of beyond emotional literacy, but not having prerequisite skills and knowledge. You know, maybe technological literacy, print literacy, et cetera, et cetera. Just something that I thought it would be interesting for you to check it out. And just something, if you're interested in either of these special issues, we have a call for proposals. Check it out. The one on the left with my wonderful friend and colleague, Anna Becker. And then, I have another one coming up. Okay, Anna, I forgot to include it here. But anyways, with the, okay, email me, and then I'll be sending it to you with, we have it with Revista Brasileira de Linguística Aplicada. And it's about pedagogies of harmony as love. Okay, so that's the third one, but I didn't include here because we just got the link very, very recently. So I have these 2 special issues, call for proposals are open, and then I have a third one as well. So email me and then I'll send it to you. And then gentle reminder, if you can't research yourself, how are you going to research somebody else? And this is a parting quote here, because I do think that when we're thinking about emotions as language researchers, teachers, we should start with ourselves always, right? What emotions do I feel? When I'm teaching, I'm always evaluating myself. You know, how am I dealing with these emotions? And teachers, we get a lot of emotions all the time when we're teaching, right? So how am I managing those emotions? How am I teaching my students to manage those emotions in the classroom, right? So think about that. Just something to keep in mind. All right, connect with me, please. My students, again, they said that I have Instagram now because my students said that Facebook is for old people. So I want to be hip and young. So check it out. Luis Javier Penton Herrera, that's my Instagram. Muito obrigado. Thank you so much for your time, kindness, and interest.
Thank you so much, Luis. This was wonderful. We really appreciate it. It was a wonderful talk, and I have many comments here, not a lot of questions, but some comments. And while the audience there, types their questions, because so far they didn't type any questions, but Pamela will put here if there are any questions there. I would like to, just congratulate you again and say that I really enjoyed many things, but the first one is when you say that emotions make or break our opportunities for growth and success, because it all depends on how we look at emotions, right? And we can take them as advantages to grow or not. So I had students who felt, discouraged by a teacher's comment, and that broke them, and they never continued studying English. And I had other students who for the same comment, they took that opportunity as something to make them grow and proceed in the language learning process. So I really like that idea, and I think it's a great way for us to think in our lives as well. I don't know if you want to say
Thank you so much, Anna. Absolutely. And that's exactly, language education. Of course, I'm biased because we're language teachers. I think we have the best profession in the world. But, language teachers, I always say the best people I know are teachers, and it's really true. But, language education, we're teaching students to communicate, to succeed in life. Like, you cannot exist without communication. Again, communication is not only speaking and listening. There are different forms of communication, and that's what we also should cover in our classrooms as well. Culture, participating in culture is communication. Knowing how to behave in certain instances, moments, that's communication. But also how to respond to experiences, to life, that happens through language as well. Our responses are language, right? So yes, definitely, I talk to my students a lot about this all the time. When I was teaching at a different institution here in Poland, we had a class. It was positive psychology in English. That was the title. I was very grateful they allowed me to create this course. And we talked about strategies, and through English, because we're learning English, and we talked about using language as a way to use, use language to help us include strategies in our life, everyday life. Like there was this one that this was very common, but 3 positives for every negative, they call it in positive psychology, which if you had a bad experience or an experience that caught you off guard, or you didn't expect, or you didn't want, think about 3 things, or right away, 3 things and that's how you balance the scales. You need 3 positive good things to balance the bad experience that you had, or the experience that you didn't want, right? So, and then all of that comes through language. Again, language, emotions, thinking, they're all connected. So I think it is, at the end of the day, we're teaching students, and that's something that I think we need to also think about in our field as language educators. We're not just teaching students how to conjugate a verb for the classroom. We're teaching as educators, we're teaching students how to interact with the world, how to be better human beings, more successful, how to deal with discouragement, for example. And going back to your example, that discouragement, research. Let me just say this: how many rejections I get from papers is that you have no idea, But I let that take me down. Oh no, I'm like, okay, this is just when one door closes, another one opens. Every rejection is a redirection. So that's how I think about things, right? And I tell my students. So it is true. How do you deal with your emotions at the end of the day? That's very important.
Well, thank you. I think I saw on Facebook one day that you put, oh, this paper was rejected, and now it was published. So that's great. Okay, so we have 3 questions here from the audience. So I'm gonna, say them at each time. So the first one is from Vera Silva. She asks, how to work on students' emotional issues in a very difficult time when teachers are immersed in very difficult feelings with difficult teaching time. That's a great question. That was actually something that I was going to ask you, because every time I talk about social emotional literacy, I think it's related to Vera's question. A lot of teachers or other people, they ask me, how can we do social emotional literacy when teachers are already doing so much and they are overloaded? Is this something more, something more of a burden for them to do? Okay.
Anna, thank you so much for, yes, and Vera, thank you so much for that question. And can we just really acknowledge we are living in a very unique reality nowadays. There's conflict everywhere, and I am very, and Vera, I go on tangents, but I'm going to go to your question, but this is how I speak on tangents. But I really, I'm very conscious about the information that I digest or that I consume, and social media, things like that. So if something is not, like violence, this, that, I immediately delete it. Like, I don't want to consume that, right? Like, I put barriers. But social media, anywhere. But sometimes the world is so full of conflict and chaotic that it comes to you without you even realizing it or wanting it, right? So we just have to acknowledge that, and students bring that with them into the classroom. But the best response that I can give you is that we really have to start with ourselves. We cannot give what we don't have, really. It's just, and let me say this, I'm very big on energy, and as teachers, we know this. As teachers, we bring our energy into the classroom. We really do, whether we acknowledge it or not. We really bring that energy into the classroom, and students feed off of that energy. I remember I've had classes, especially in the US, I've had days where I bring all of this energy and I give it to my students, and they don't give it back to me. And I don't know if some of you have ever been in those classes where you're giving everything that you have, and at the end of the class, I'm drained because students didn't give it back to me, right? But sometimes you're in those classes that you're like full of energy, and then the students give it back to you. You're like, this is going great. Maybe you're not teaching anything groundbreaking, but it's just the energy that is flowing there, right? But you cannot give that to your students, even if they don't give it back to you. You cannot give them that positive energy, that helpful, that, uplifting energy if you don't have it. So for me personally, it's been a process. It's not going to take one day. It's been a process from my first year, as I shared, going into back home every day and going straight into the couch and the sofa and just crying. And I was like, okay, this is not going to work for me. Like, this is not sustainable. So I started slowly doing different practices and different strategies. When I was, the last year that I was working in the US in K through 12, because at the university you don't have a classroom. We know this as the university professor, but in K through 12 I had a classroom, and my students would come to the classroom. So I started doing a lot of different things in my personal life, becoming more aware of my mental health, my physical health, because physical health and emotional health are connected. So taking care of myself. But then also in the classroom, I love aromatherapy. So I would bring, in the background, I would put like very, very low relaxing music. I would bring like scents to the classroom. It really helped my students. Little things like that also helps my students, I found in the US. But definitely starting with yourself, our routines. Are we taking care of ourselves? Are we always stressed? It's not good. And the older I get, if I get stressed, my neck stiffs, and then I can't, so I cannot deal with stress. So making sure that our practices, our life practices are well organized for ourselves first, and then we can bring that into the classroom. So that's the best answer I can give.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Luis. So we have some comments here as well by Givanildo. Brilliant talk, Luis. The way you explained and illustrated the presentation was really good. Also, Maria de Rosarios thanked you and said she felt good listening these questions. I'm learning. And then we have two questions by Jardel and one by Marta. Okay, Jardel asks, which fields outside of applied linguistics do you believe we should collaborate with more closely to enrich our understanding of emotions in language learning?
Well, I mean, definitely, you mentioned here applied linguistics, language education, applied linguistics, intercultural communication. I think it's a great, we don't bring it too often, but intercultural communications will be another great sister field, we can call it. I think also, I'm getting also very big into going into, we do that also in language education, but we go into general education to see what's happening and then bring it into language education as well, right? That's what I did with social emotional learning before. Social emotional learning is huge in general education. We had nothing in language education, very little, right? Thankfully, it's becoming bigger now.
But psychology as well, right?
Psychology, absolutely, yes, and that's where positive psychology is coming from. Yes, psychology. We have now a lot of journals devoted to psychology or psychological aspects of, like, we have an association. Anna, that's what we met. I forgot the name, but
International Association of Applied Linguistics, of Positive Psychology, but it was the Psychology for Positive Psychology for Learning. Yeah, Positive Psychology for Learning, PLL. No.
Yeah, so
Psychology for Language Learning.
Psychology for Language Learning. There it is.
PLL. Yeah.
Definitely. Also, I would love to see more. This might be a little bit unique, but like maybe social linguistics, of course, is also there. But even I'm seeing more with applied linguistics. I don't know how we cannot really separate it, because society, everything that happens in society percolates into education. You know, education is kind of like a microcosm of society, but I'm seeing a lot of political aspects of politics, political studies, but politics going into education, language education as well. So that's an interesting turn as well.
And Jardel had another question: which emotion do you believe has been overlooked by researchers and warrants further investigation?
Great question. There's so many. I'm gonna go back here to bracket. So many. I love many emotions. I'm working right now on an edited book. It's just starting with another colleague of mine. His name is Jabber. And Jabber and I, we have 3 parts for that edited book. The third part of the book, it's about autoethnography, it's about emotions. And the third part is language teachers, practitioners, because I'm just right now, that's my goal, to bring as many practitioner voices as possible into the field. I think we need more voices from the infantry of education. You know, that's what I call it, teachers, practitioners, the infantry of education. But anyways, so going back into your question here, and in part 3, we have autoethnographies of specific emotions, each of them, who have not been very explored. Some that come to mind: frustration, envy, guilt, pride, nostalgia, grief. I'm obsessed with grief right now. Grief, in the emotion of grief. How do you deal? There was this teacher in Georgia, and we were talking, and she has been experiencing as a teacher, because teachers, we explore secondhand trauma. What our students feel, we feel with them, especially when they open up to us. We're teachers, we're empathetic. And she was talking to me about how many of her students had experienced loss that year. She's like, Luis, I'm experiencing this grief that I've never felt before through my students, and I don't know how to help them. I'm like, we don't talk about grief in the language classroom. And by the way, grief, there are many manifestations of grief. It's about losing something or someone, grief, right? And how do you lose that? Or how do you deal with that losing, right? But yeah, that was a fantastic question. I mean, we have so many emotions here that we haven't talked about.
Yeah, thank you, Luis. I think the next one is by Marta Nobre. She wants to know more about the affective filter. How emotional filter is described? What is affective filter in the context of language teaching learning?
Yes, and thank you so much for that question. So I'm going to go back here, Marta, so this is Krashen, in one of his books. He proposed this. It's a hypothesis. He proposed this hypothesis of, he called it the affective, like affect emotions, affective filter. And it's this idea that when emotions that you do not know how to deal with increase, or go up, or just happen when you're language learning, like frustration or anxiety or like the confusion, all of these things, right? They call it affective filter. Is this idea of your brain, imagine like computers when they start freezing, like your brain cannot process it, and you're focused on everything that you're feeling, especially if you're anxious, frustrated, your heart starts beating fast, you might get your hands sweaty, right? So you start, your mouth might get dry, so you start feeling on everything that's happening in your body, affect emotions. So your brain stops processing. If you're feeling anxious, frustrated, all of these things, bored, demotivated, you're just not going to focus on the conjugation of the verb to be is no, because you're in a fight or flight mode, right? Like you're concerned. So that's the idea of emotion, affective filter. When your emotions that you don't know how to deal with or manage go up, your brain processing capacities go down. So you have to lower how students are feeling. That's the idea with lowering emotions, right? So you have to lower emotions that students don't know how to mitigate or how to deal with, so their brain capacity goes up, right? So this idea of if they feel happy, they feel safe in the learning classroom, in the learning environment, then they're going to process information better, right? Also, if you give them cookies, my students love cookies, so they're happy. The sweets, everybody loves sweets.
That's great. I have a dear colleague here. I don't think she's watching, but she takes food. She makes delicious apple pie. You're gonna meet her. Yeah, she makes delicious apple pie, and she takes this apple pie. Her apple pie is famous all over the department. And she takes apple pies to the students, and she makes food and takes to the students. And the students do remember this, and they feel, so welcomed and loved, with this. So thanks for mentioning that. So we have another question here, but before that, Fernanda said, wonderful talk, congratulations. Vera thanked you, and she said, that's exactly what I think. You can't give others what you don't have. And Larissa, again, thank you, congratulations, Luis. So DGH Castillo said, when preparing your classes, do you include emotional goals in your plan or something similar?
Great question. Yes, I always have, as teachers, we have language objectives, content objectives, because we have to, and then I have social emotional competencies, I call it, social emotional competencies. And as teachers, we have to, in the same way that you have to figure out how to connect language and content objectives for your instruction, I do the same with language objectives, content objectives, and social emotional competencies. Always, it's always part of my preparation, always. I also embed it in my assignments. So in my rubrics also, I'll give you an example. So I want my students, agency is a big thing that I want my students to have to take more control of their learning process, right? And to reflect. Reflection is very important for me. So that's one of my social emotional competencies, reflection. So what I started doing last semester, is that in the final, we have different assignments, and there is an assignment that I always give, participation and attendance, right? And they had to, in the rubric, they had to complete the rubric. And one of the aspects is that they have to propose for participation and for attendance, depending on, because I give them the rubrics, like if you attended to everything, then you get this points and that point. Right? But then they have to choose what they think they got, and then they have to write a paragraph or two explaining why. Reflect on why you think you deserve that. For participation, for attendance. So I'm doing things like that more often now. I also want them to, for reflection, something else that I'm doing also for assignments, when I give them feedback, because sometimes feedback, you just give them feedback and that's it. But I'm like, no, I want to continue this. Sometimes I might give them the opportunity to get a couple more points, or up to 5 more points. If they write to me after they get the feedback, they write a reflection, short reflection essay on how they can use that feedback to improve next time. What can they learn from that feedback? So it's about reflection. That's social emotional competencies, right? Yes, so definitely that's something that I'm embedding in everything I do, in my teaching, in my preparation, in my assignments. I do know that sometimes where we teach, we're not given the capabilities to do that, but I'm very grateful that my university does allow me to do that. I tell them, because I don't do final tests anymore, I do assignments, I do projects where I can embed all of these 3 elements.
Okay, thank you, Luis. Yes, because thank you, Vera. Vera said, I love the meeting, for more meetings like that. Yes, always, Vera. Yes.
Yes.
Yeah.
Is it Vera Lúcia Teixeira da Silva?
Yeah, is it Vera? Oh, okay. Vera, thank you so much for being here.
Vera was my first English teacher at university. So every time I see her, I have to go and say, Thank you for everything, Vera.
That's
Yeah.
amazing.
Yeah. But Luis, thank you so much. I think that, when I talk about social emotional learning or emotional literacy, a lot of the teachers or some researchers, I think because of the work overload they have, or maybe they don't agree much, it's just too much for teachers at some point. They think, well, am I going to stop everything now and talk about emotions? I'm not qualified to talk about emotions. I'm not a psychologist. This is just something else for me to do. And then I said, well, listen, you are doing emotional literacy, whether you are aware or not, whether you are or not, because you are, with your example, with your voice, with your activities, the way you arrive in class, everything that you do is emotional literacy. So
100%.
the way you set the activities, the way you give students choice or not, the way you talk to them, look at them, everything is emotional literacy. You can't get
100%.
away from that, right?
100%. Thank you for saying that, Anna, because yes, we're not psychologists, but we are professionals who are 100% and all the time and constantly working with human beings.
Yes.
And we have to understand how to deal with that. And we have to understand how to deal with ourselves too. Sometimes I have days, like all of us, we're human beings. I have days that I'm very tired and I'm like, okay, Luis, so you are at like 40% of your capacity today. Within my abilities, what can I do to give my best in the classroom, right?
Yeah.
And that's, sometimes we come in at 100%, and that's fantastic. Especially when I was in my 20s, I was usually at 100%. But now it's usually lower. And what can I do with what I have, right? As teachers, we also have to think about that for ourselves. Going back to that question of starting with ourselves, but then also with our students, right? Sometimes our students are at 200%. We're like, okay, how can we get you to 100? So that's also something that we have to think about. We had this issue, which I don't know if it's in Brazil the same, but in the United States, we had a lot of issues with disruptive classroom experiences and instances that we had a lot of disruptions from students. And we would talk to, in Brazil, similar. It's I talk to my colleagues all the time, and they, when I talk to them about emotions also, and they're like, well, I just have to teach. And there is research out there that says this, but if you do not address what's happening in the classroom, emotions and our humanity, the fact that, okay, why are you doing this? How can I help you? What's happening? Talk to students on a more personal level, see what's really happening to them. You're going to spend the entire class asking students to correct themselves, to behave. So most of your classroom is going to be about correcting students and not about teaching. So we have to, I always feel that human relationships is the first phase or aspect of teaching, and then content.
Yeah, I agree, totally agree. Well, I think the time that we have to finish, unfortunately, finish this talk, but we'll be able to talk a little bit more with Luis in private if he allows us.
Absolutely.
But for the audience here, I hope you have enjoyed. We enjoyed a lot, and we can't wait for having Luis here in Brazil. So stay tuned, because he's probably going to Bahia and Rio. Okay, audience.
Rio.
Wow,
this is something.
Thank you so much for being here, and now I give the floor to Suellen to conclude.
Thank you again, Luis. It was really pleasant to be here with you this morning. And as Anna said, I hope we can keep in touch and see face-to-face, right, in person very soon.
Yes. Thank you.
So on behalf of GPLA, LET, and FORPROLI team, I would like to thank everyone who was here on the channel again. And please do not forget to follow us on our special networks, FORPROLI.UFSB, and Linguagem. .UERJ, right? You changed. Okay, thank you.
Instagram.
So to thumbs up this video as well here on our channel, and share it with anyone who may be interested in the topic. Okay, guys? So we hope to see you again here in the same place, FORPROLI channel, at 8:30 in a different time, okay, but the Brazilian time zone, on June 13th, to talk about emotion through a small lens with Professor Richard Sampson. who is a professor of English at Suellen University, right, in Japan. Okay? Thank you very much again. A big hug, and see you next month. Bye-bye.
See you. Bye-bye.